Hello and welcome. Ten here, and today I'm going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly for Mortal Shell 2, so you can decide if a game's for you. This is going to be my first impressions rather than a full review because I put about 15 hours in, so I've done a decent chunk of a game, but I haven't finished it and I'm not that close. First off, I've just got to say the vibe of Mortal Shell 2 is both really weird and also pretty cool, because they made the bold decision to replace many vowels with E. You say the word mother, but in Mortal Shell 2 they say the word mether. You say brother, they have brother. And I like it when a game has character like this, because it makes the world and the lore stand out, even if the story isn't all that interesting to me. I'm not going to get into spoilers here, but yeah, the story from Mortal Shell 2 didn't really grab me. I didn't end up getting too attached to any of the characters, but it is a really cool world to inhabit. And when the world isn't being super foggy, the scenery is also quite cool. You've got a mix of your standard medieval dark fantasy stuff, but then some really spiky, gothic, almost metal band kind of iconography, and you have the really weird body horror stuff. Like at one place, I went into the zone, and there's a bunch of these things that look like mummies, except they turn into a blood explosion if you get near them. Oh, and for some reason, the rocks in that area, they just have teeth sticking out of them. I don't know, I don't think that's too normal. But of course, Mortal Shell 2 is a Soulslike, a genre of game that lives and dies based on its combat system and its world. So let's get into combat first. What sets the game apart here is the shell system. Think of this like the game's version of classes. But unlike most games, which lock you into a classic character creation, you can swap between shells pretty much whenever you want, basically when you go back to a beacon, so whenever you die, because yeah, you're going to die a lot, it's a Souls-like. And each shell offers a different playstyle. So Teal is more of a rogue. He's the first one you're going to get out of a prologue. He has a lot of bonuses for dodging enemies, and a stealth mechanic where you can go invisible and execute a shadow strike, basically a guaranteed riposte. Then you have Proxima, she's more of a tank. After that you find more, like Gragu. Nope, not Grogu, we are not talking about Baby Yoda here. Gragu. What I like about Gragu is that he can literally eat the hearts of his enemies. So instead of the Estus system, which refills when you rest at a beacon or when you die, he gets hearts, which refill when he kills enemies. Really good when exploring. It makes it so much more manageable because you don't have to worry about chip damage, but that's not going to help you on bosses. So on bosses, he's a little more risky to use. The shells are also some of the characters that you encounter. You experience a bit of their stories, but honestly, I kind of just saw them as stat sheets and abilities because I wasn't really into their stories. This also means that you don't die when your health reaches 0. Instead, you are knocked out of your shell. You then get to fight as the Harbinger. So no special abilities, though you can still use your weapon, sidearm, any weapon ability that you have. And if you do enough damage, you reclaim your shell, and then you get all your cool abilities back. It's a pretty neat take on the second wind system. And there are a couple other cool things that Mortal Shell's combat does. The first of which is defensive options. You swap these around using a seal. So you have standard things like block and parry, but you also have harden. This freezes your character mid-action. It stops one enemy attack. If you time it right, you fully refund the ability to freeze yourself and inflict some break damage. But because you can do it mid-action, you can start your attack, harden yourself, and then your attack will complete after the enemy hits you, breaking the harden. In addition, you get these things called tar stones. Basically, they add abilities to your weapons and sidearm. And you put all this together, add some shell abilities, and you make your build. But after you have an awesome build, what about the bosses you fight? Well, so far I would describe the bosses I've encountered as medium difficulty. They took me between a couple tries and about a half hour. Less than a lot of Elden Ring fights, more than a lot of fights in other games. And they do feel a little bit less interactive than enemies in the open world, because a lot of their attacks are red attacks, meaning you can't block them and you can't harden them. You need to dodge. They're also leaning a little bit more into the cinematic, where after you've done enough damage, the boss enters a new phase, very often accompanied by it falling down, giving you an opportunity to riposte the boss for a nice bit of damage. And then of course, the boss gets new moves that get more aggressive, and the fight continues. By the way, if you want to know more about shells, builds, how to get good at combat, I'm going to be covering some of that in future videos, so get subscribed, and hey, leave a like while you're done there. YouTube really loves that stuff. For now, I want to talk about the world. Mortal Shell 2 uses an open world design that reminds me a lot of Elden Ring. The world is, relatively speaking, not that big. I think it's probably a little bit bigger than Caelid, which, don't get me wrong, that's a huge zone, but in comparison to video game worlds, not that huge. But oh my god, it is so dense. Your first few hours, you'll be exploring, you'll be like, wow, I found so much stuff, and then you realize that you've spent all of your time in one small section of Faneweald. And there's several other zones to explore beyond Faneweald. Almost everywhere you go, there's new dungeons to enter, new enemies to fight, beacons to cleanse, maybe not quite enough beacons, more on that later, all sorts of cool stuff to find. And the world does a good job of interconnecting itself. So, despite feeling very big and kind of easy to get lost in at first, as I spent more time navigating areas, I found very quickly, oh, I can just jump off this cliff because there's no fall damage, and I'm right back where I wanted to be. I also like that the different beacons and dungeons don't feel like copy-pastes of each other. For example, in one of them, I needed to use these stone gateways to proceed. They seem to lead to another dimension with the ways clear. In another, I was able to go through a wall, find a secret room, and then do some sliding block puzzles. And as I do these, the rewards are often well worth it. Things like tar stones, weapons, potentially a shell, or a sidearm. So things that make me feel like I'm being rewarded for going out of my way. I'm not sure if this will continue all the way through to the end of the game, but at least for now, it's really good. I also like that sometimes the answer to the puzzle is, just attack the lock and shatter it. Who needs to find a key when you can do that instead? Though while exploring, I do have a couple of complaints. The first of which is that enemy damage is very inconsistent. Now, if I get hit by a boss slam and I get one shot because it was a big, huge telegraph that I knew I should have moved out of, that's fine. If a random enemy one-shots me, that's a lot less fine. Especially when that's not the game indicating to me, hey, you shouldn't be here, but more of, hey, this enemy hits really hard for some reason. A bunch of the other enemies in the area, though they're totally fine. But that one, he's going to one-shot you. I suspect this is an unfortunate side effect of the shell system where devs have to kill you twice, so sometimes they just kill you once to be like, hey, you're vulnerable now. Next up, dungeons have no checkpoint at the entrance. So, if you die while doing the dungeon, something that's going to happen quite a bit, you have to go all the way from a beacon back to the dungeon, and then all the way through the dungeon, get your gloom, aka your souls, and complete it. I really wish there was some sort of checkpoint at the start of a dungeon, so that you could just restart from there. Since I've been talking about the negatives, let's move on to the bad. Things that I dislike, that bug me a bit, but aren't that big of a deal. But something I haven't mentioned so far is the weapon upgrade system. You get Ventrium, Laterite, all sorts of different resources. And as you're going through and you're progressing, there's a lot of cool weapons to find. So every time I found a new weapon, I'd put it on and try it. And as I was doing this, I was upgrading the weapons. I then started to run short on materials, so as I got a new weapon, I didn't immediately have the resources to upgrade it. On the one hand, maybe if I get a bit farther in the game, I'll run into something like the bell bearings from Elden Ring, which allow you to buy infinite upgrade materials. On the other hand, I kind of feel like weapon upgrades as a whole in Souls games is starting to get a little bit old. Because if you're going to give me a bunch of different weapons, I want to try them out. I want to make builds with them. I want to do awesome stuff. I don't want to feel like an upgrade system is holding me back from using the cool sword that I just found. In that regard, Mortal Shell 2 does do a little bit. Some of the weapons you find are higher level, they're basically pre-upgraded. But odds are, if you focus on one weapon as opposed to doing what I'm doing and trying them all, you'll have something that is far stronger than anything you'd find out in the world, and it's going to take a fair bit of work to catch something else up if you end up liking the weapon. But there's another game, Soulslike by the name of Wuchang Fallen Feathers, which did this much better, where weapons were instead tied to a skill tree and could be respec'd for free at any time. This way, I was upgrading a weapon class instead of an individual weapon, and I could very easily swap between them if I just wanted to try something new or change my build for a boss. Now, I'm not saying free respec at any time is something that every game needs to do. I think it's totally fine to somewhat lock someone into a build, but I also think it's very important to allow players to experiment. So, anytime you get a new weapon, I think the game should give you a way to try it out, and if you like it, transition into building around that weapon without thinking, oh, okay, I have to go back to this area that I've already cleared to go find more Ventrim that I just didn't bother to pick up earlier. No one wants to have to go do grinding and farming to try the cool new sword they got. They want to just put on the sword and smack enemies in the face. The other thing that bugs me is just a fair bit of AA jank. Most of it isn't too bad. Sometimes a dungeon just bugs out and I couldn't progress a puzzle. Sometimes my character would look real weird because they got stuck in an animation. Sometimes the camera just sucks. Little things like that that overall don't get that much in the way of gameplay. I lose a couple minutes of progress at most, but it does detract from the overall feel. The world is really cool, the combat, a pretty good mix of the slower, more methodical from Souls games, and a little bit of spectacle here and there. With that said, none of these things are my biggest complaints, and overall, while they do bug me, I'd say they're relatively minor. My biggest complaint is the inconsistency with enemy AI. Now, luckily, I have not experienced this with bosses. Bosses are far more consistent in their attack patterns, probably because they're in a boss arena. But normal enemies in the open world, first of all, they will aggro from very far away. So sometimes I'll go to sneak up on a dude. He will always see me unless I'm officially using stealth with a shell like teal, and then I'll kill him. And then another enemy will show up, and another enemy will show up, and another enemy will show up. Because I was just near enough to aggro not only a nearby camp, but all of that camp's friends. Similarly, sometimes enemies aren't aggressive enough. They will just stand there. Sometimes they'll attack a bunch of times. Other times, they will stop attacking. Now, if you stagger an enemy, i.e. hit them with something and their health bar flashes red, yes, this interrupts their attack. Of course they're going to stop attacking. If you break an enemy, they fall to the ground, you can crit them, all that stuff. Of course they're not attacking. I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about just the enemy kind of stops attacking. It forgets that it's supposed to be doing stuff. It doesn't happen super often, but it is often enough that I've started to notice. And so with that, what's the verdict? Well, if you enjoyed the original Mortal Shell, you're probably going to like Mortal Shell 2, because this is a huge improvement over the original. The shell system's really cool, they've done a lot to round out the world, and the combat feels miles better than it did in the original. The original was so rough that I did not play the game for very long. I put it down after like a couple hours. This, I'm going to keep playing it for sure, and probably finish the game over the next week or so. On the other hand, if you don't like jank in your Souls-like, you don't like getting one-shot, you don't like it when hitboxes aren't quite what you'd expect, maybe give this a pass for now, because it does have some of those rough edges and the good old AA jank. Now, with patches, I suspect a fair amount of those things are going to be smoothed over and rounded out. But for now, you might not have the best time, so hold off. Also, if you like open-world Souls-like experiences, this is the best one that I've played since Elden Ring. It does a really good job of making a world that's very dense, so it always feels like there's a lot to do. The dungeons are different enough that they don't feel like copy-pastes, but the world is interconnected enough that I don't feel like I'm traversing through a giant open space. Everything's a lot closer than I'd expect, actually. Combine that with some of the more unique build crafting aspects, such as using different shells that have different abilities. Gragu, really good for farming out in the open world because kills restore his healing mechanic, for example. And you're in for a good time. Right now, I'm about 15 hours in. I've had a good time so far. If any of my thoughts change, I'll talk about that in a follow-up video. But for now, I'm going to get back to exploring the world, because the vibe is basically Bloodborne meets heavy metal, and that's a pretty cool combo. Now, if you're looking for something else to watch, maybe you want something Mortal Shell 2 related, I made a quick video on how to get the Tar Golem to 0 health. This is the first boss you fight at the end of a prologue. And yes, you are supposed to lose, but if you play well enough, you can get his health to 0 and earn yourself a special achievement. That'll be up in the card and down below. On the other hand, if you want some guides for Mortal Shell 2, get subscribed. I'm going to be coming out with a couple in the near future. Not 100% sure what they're going to be yet. But it's probably going to be something like a beginner's guide, tips and tricks, and possibly some sort of build-related stuff after I play with more of the shells, more of the weapons, and more of the sidearms. But for now, I need to get back to exploring Fulgrim, so thank you very much for watching to the end. See you in the next one.